right. Go ahead and get things rolling here. Thank you all for joining us on our I Comply first of our fall forum series. Just in time for spooky season, we're going to be talking about laboratory testing, the failures that are happening out there in the industry, and what to do in the event of compliance. Why are these things happening? And how to look out for some of the red flags as a business owner to avoid falling into the laboratory testing traps that are out there. Specifically, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what we're seeing really recently in the news. I'm going to just share my screen here on some of the news results that anyone can take a look at. But if you're paying attention, a lot of the kumbaya period that happens with regulators when new markets launch and everybody's friends and holding hands and singing kumbaya is coming to an end. In a lot of ways, I think, especially states that think they were well established, are running into a lot of issues when it comes to laboratory testing. In a lot of ways, the industry has relied on laboratories to be the pinnacle of vetting through third party validation, the safety and efficacy of products, the potency of those products, the homogeneity of those products, and to ensure that consumers are receiving a consistently safe and homogeneous and equally potent test result every time they consume that edible, every time that they look at a label and they see the percentages for THC, CBD, or other cannabinoids. And in a lot of ways, the laboratories themselves never really had years and years of research or standards in which to pull from in order to ensure accurate test results. And many of them operate with different types of equipment, whether that's liquid chromatography, gas chromatography, spectrometry, and are getting different protocols that are happening in each of these different labs. Some of them are achieving standards like ISO, some of them are achieving global standards, but a lot of them lack sort of even the basic standards by which to base some of that stuff on. So there are challenges in the laboratory testing industry that I think are important to highlight, and challenges that certainly we've tried to work through on regulatory rulemaking. It was part of some of those initial conversations. And even in Colorado, there are considered to sometimes be the thought leader on these issues. There are scientific advisory boards that are out there looking at things like, hey, are these contamination levels for these types of heavy metals too low? Are these pesticides really that prevalent? Are we catching drift rather than direct application of pesticides? And so the conversation's always ongoing, but as people know, it's really difficult to pass sometimes testing results, especially for things like microbial contamination, where the limits are lower than they are for FDA foods, and certainly a lot lower than they are for tobacco and smoking, which has almost no standards when it comes to what people put in their lungs, as long as they put on a Surgeon General's warning. So we know that the industry itself is under heavier pressure, heavier scrutiny, but we're seeing a lot of this sort of kumbaya period come to an end, and we're starting to see a lot of issues with the regulators starting to crack down on testing labs by doing independent testing analysis, or doing proficiency testing by testing the same sample in multiple labs, including state-run labs, and they're getting different results. So, for example, we have a state testing lab in Missouri that's popping up. This is what this headline is about. After 2 years of operating that industry, and there's rationale for that. There's a real need for the public safety to be protected, and regulators are really understanding the need for safety and potency testing to be accurate. So, should there be a state standard testing lab that kind of vets the other testing labs, or by which the other testing labs should base their standards on? Oregon cracking down on THC inflation and THC creep. So because we've sort of left the chicken and the fox in charge of the hen house, so to speak, with the laboratories being really in charge of their own compliance, not having a great understanding by regulators on what that compliance should look like, we've seen the industry and the labs sort of come into a business making mode. The labs are private companies. They're not third parties. They're not nonprofits. They're for-profit businesses. So we've seen kind of THC creep, or THC inflation, as we like to call it, where if you pay me a little bit more money, I'm going to give you a result on your THC that seems to be a little bit higher than your competitors. So, I mean, especially in the beginning, we saw a lot of this happening where THC numbers jumped from 15, 16% being considered a really good potency, a high potency product, a good quality strain, to 24, 25, 26. Now we have sort of over 33 or 32% THC on flower in a lot of cases. And it's hard to look at that bud and go, yeah, with the stems, the flower itself, and then the trichromes, that the THC components of those trichromes are making up a third of that gram's weight. That to me is sort of a potency by volume a very difficult metric to try to quantify. And unfortunately, our quality standards in the cannabis industry really have us sniffing a bag, looking at a product, and otherwise going, what are the test results? And we're assuming that higher potency means higher quality. Therefore, you can charge more money for higher potency cannabis. In a lot of ways, that's because 85% of the consumers buying from dispensaries are considered heavy or daily users of cannabis, and they may require more potency to achieve the same effect. But we're missing, I think, a swath of people that grew up smoking less potent cannabis that may not mind a lower potency strain. And certainly with the popularity of Delta 8, Delta 10, and the CBD beverage industry, for example, we're seeing people really looking for sort of a slight or mild high to their experience rather than a heavy dose. So I'm not sure if we're going to continue to see THC creep be as prevalent as it has been, especially if regulators are cracking down like they are in Oregon, like they are in other states, California, for example. Hopefully that will change and it will have better quality determinants on what is good flower other than just THC creep. Because it really doesn't make sense for you to walk into a liquor store and go, I'm buying Everclear because that's the best bottle of liquor there is because it has the highest potency. And unfortunately, we're sort of collapsing highly potent strains because they sell popularly with heavy users with total quality and demand in general. So hopefully we start to distinguish that a little bit, but we're starting to see that the regulators are not appreciating that you're getting wildly higher results because you're paying more money for those results to a lab than you would get from another lab. And that THC creep issue has been an issue in multiple states. You're seeing irregularities happening between different labs all the time, whether that's between potency, like we mentioned, or whether that's between contamination. Maine is having lab testing irregularities, prompting wide adult use cannabis recalls. And if you've never been through a recall, I don't suggest it. It's a very painful, very expensive process to have to go through your metric data and pull all of the products you may have sold, advise all your consumers, and have a warning go out to all of your competitors. Not only is it sort of embarrassing and dignity robbing, but it's also a pain in the butt, and it's very expensive to go out there and recall that product back in. Then usually you have a hard time remediating or reusing that product, so it's an entire loss on a production run or on a batch. And this is one of the challenges that we're starting to see out there as well with sort of the pairing and marrying of the industry being in bed with laboratories who should be, right, these third party stop all check verification systems and play that role in the whole design of the regulatory model. We're starting to see a lot of issues around laboratories probably testing, knowing that they're testing in a way that is not representative of the entire batch of cannabis. So as regulations go up, I think we're up to 600 and something pages in Colorado alone. Other states, you never get less rules, you always get more rules. Every year they change. We're going through another rule change now. Next month, we'll be hosting our regulatory update seminar to go through all of those red line changes on the rules and regulations just for Colorado clients. But as the rules change more, the cost of compliance becomes more. And we're seeing that in an environment where compliance costs more, inflation's gone up, ingredients cost more, and we're growing more cannabis than we ever have before with less demand because new states are opening up. And so you have a supply and demand issue where an oversupply causes the price of cannabis to drop through the floor. And until we adjust production capacity and how much people are growing, we're not seeing that price bounce back. We're just seeing businesses go under. I mean, even the Green Dragon, once considered to be one of the top three largest operators vertically integrated in the state of Colorado, is now going under and declaring bankruptcy. So we're seeing low prices, high costs. We're growing more weed for less money for some reason, rather than growing maybe less weed for more money and focusing on things like quality and safety and laboratory testing and consistency in our process. So what's happening? Well, a lot of operators know they can't afford to pay for the whole batch of marijuana to be microbial control stepped or remediated or fixed through UV irradiation, ozone oxidization, whatever the case might be. They can't pay for that whole batch to be done. So some people are maybe microwaving their samples and sending in the samples as if it's representative of the whole batch. Or they're sending in a smaller amount in with another batch to be microbial control stepped, taking out that small portion once they get the microbial control step back, and sending that small portion as a representative of a different batch that had nothing to do with the one that was remediated, all in an effort to try to save money on laboratory costs and on paying for microbial control steps for remediation. And fundamentally, at the end of the day, they're saving money on having to revamp their entire grow in order to create more efficient systems, because it costs a lot of money to put in drip feed irrigation systems, to put in automatic sensors and monitors, to put in fertigation systems. All of these things cost a big capital expenditure that they don't have because they're not making enough money. So we're sort of putting band-aids on the problem. We're shortcutting, we're cutting corners in order to try to meet regulatory compliance or pretend like we are, right? And this is happening a lot in the industry. Labs are taking in these small samples or knowingly perhaps seeing two different types of samples, testing them separately, and sort of colluding with the industry on adulterating those samples or allowing for the adulteration of samples because they get paid per test anyway. So there's no stopgap measure in the regulations that say that the lab has to report these operators that are clearly irradiating something or microwaving it before they send it to the lab, or putting it in with the wrong batch and pretending like it's part of the same batch. Or the lab is saying, yep, we tested that sample and it's representative of the whole batch without knowing how large the batch really is. So one way or another, they're sort of in bed with or allowing for turning away a blind eye to some of the behavior that's happening. And I think fundamentally, right, if we could afford to comply with the rules and regulations of the game itself, more people would probably still be in business, and certainly a lot more people wouldn't be cutting corners. So I think fundamentally, this is a real problem with the amount of supply that's allowed compared to the amount of demand that's adjusted post COVID, and that people actually have with new states opening up and not having the same demand to meet the same amount of supply we're continuing to cultivate. So as long as we have an oversupply, we have low prices, we're going to have problems with laboratory testing from an operations standpoint. And because of this sort of collusion with the customer and the lab, there is no sort of third-party sampling. There's no third-party validation. Some states require sampling training, some states don't. So there could be problems in the way those samples are taken. We've also seen just, of course, operational problems, whether that's sampling or leaving your samples by a vent near a window where drift comes in and contaminates your sample. And even though the batch isn't contaminated, now the sample is. We've seen people buy old backpack sprayers that they thought they could use on their cannabis plants, not knowing that the previously used equipment had a pesticide that was banned, and now they've sprayed it on all their plants. So certainly there's the operational HACCP controls that we really should be looking at for hazard access critical control points and some of these other regulations we're seeing in Colorado to try to create cleaner results and improve quality standards consistently over time. We're starting to see the regulators get into that right alongside labor law. And right now, OSHA especially is coming around and hitting people pretty hard. So a lot of these potential issues that could crop up, a lot of reasons why the labs themselves are sort of at fault for this. And how I guess, do we avoid this? How do we look at this from an operational standpoint and maybe switch gears from the problems, because we know it's a nightmare. We called this webinar the ninth circle of hell for a reason, not just because we're near Halloween, but because it's one of the more challenging areas to meet compliance in consistently, let alone at the cost that's needed to be done. So I think some of the first things that we could look at in terms of operations is to really understand that the game is set up so that those producing the most efficiently have the margins in order to win. That means retooling oftentimes the operation, especially on grows, towards automation, towards less labor intensive operations, which means less jobs, sometimes less overhead, but it does mean more efficient operations and a better return on the investment for that equipment. But it does take an investment. You may have to shut down your rooms in order to completely revamp them, which means lost product. You may have to set up some sort of conveyance system, or perhaps trimming machines or other equipment that may require permits and approval and delay the process. If you don't file for changes and modification of the premises, for example, you could have anything grown in those new areas you're opening up or expanding into completely seized and not able to be produced or harvested or sold. So these are certainly risks that come with looking at revamping operations. But in the long run, it's going to save you a lot more money, a lot more efficiency over time than it is to have inconsistent watering, inconsistent results, a lot of labor intensive overhead. Compliance falls through the cracks. You run the bigger risk of getting more fines because someone forgot to fill out the log on moving the plants that day because they were too busy hand watering. These are real world implications of I think, what the long term solution is towards automation, as well as accountability and ensuring that things are taken care of. If you're going to try to achieve, for example, reduced testing allowance or what used to be called process validation, what are the steps in place to ensuring that documentation happens? What forms, logs, etc., are you gathering in order to be able to do that? And then what does your sampling protocol look like? How are you pulling those samples? And how are you ensuring those clean test results are coming back? And if you haven't already done a HACCP map or a process map your facility, I think it's also an important first step in order to just kind of know what comes with the territory of your business. If you're not doing a process map in terms of determining where your critical control points are and what the critical limits are within those critical control points, then you're planning to if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So you're planning to fail in terms of having cross contamination happen or having something that really does create a problem for your plants. If you can't afford integrated pest management and applying pesticides at the right time, right, in order to prevent microbial contamination, then you're going to be running into problems in the long run. So I'd really encourage operators to look at their operations, look at the costs involved, and see where they can start making gradual improvements towards longer term solutions that are going to have that ROI coming back on those investments so that you don't keep running into these problems. Number two, keep in mind they're pulling products from the shelves. So if you are out there, you know people out there that are already adulterating samples, sending in the wrong amounts. The second piece of advice I have is to stop doing that. It really isn't worth the cost savings for adulterating samples. In Colorado, that's now considered a higher level violation, up to a $100,000 fine per instance that they catch you in doing that. And they are catching people almost every single day, definitely every week. I'm seeing recall notifications from regulators, heavy, especially in Oregon, heavy in California, heavy in Colorado, and starting to see it crop up in Missouri and other states that are sort of getting over that kumbaya period. So I really think it's important to pay attention to the fact that they can pull your product from the shelf, test it at the dispensary, and if it fails there because you lied about it earlier on in the process, you're getting a recall notification, you're getting suspended, and you're getting that product shut down, pulled off the shelves, and your reputation damaged. So is it really worth saving that couple $100 on a test, or is it worth growing the product right in the first place and then doing it the right way, like everyone else, and playing by the rules, over trying to skirt the issue, cut the corners, and cause issues for yourself as well as your lab? I think that's an important third piece of advice. Make sure you know your laboratory. The folks at your lab should not have had issues in the past with gaps in integrity, and the people you should be hiring should be qualified as laboratory directors, probably from other industries than just cannabis for a long period of time, not to mention right at a rate you can afford and all those things. But more importantly, that they're going to deliver you back honest results. They don't do THC creep pay, and you're not trying to game the system with them. There are companies out there getting in trouble repeatedly, and there are companies out there that do not. You almost want the quiet little lab that nobody hears about because they probably do a good job consistently over time. It will probably take care of you better than maybe some of the bigger ones that are out there creating some of these nefarious sort of deals and being in bed with cutting the corners behavior that we're seeing in the industry. The other thing that I would highly recommend is having the right PPE in place, the right protocols for sanitation, and cleaning on a regular basis to prevent contamination. This is part of the critical control points. So I just want to touch back base on it, but it's such simple little practices on a daily basis that really go a long way. Cleaning your equipment, maintaining it regularly. These should be schedules just like your IPM, just like your grow schedule, that really are in a calendar of sorts to go in and do the regular maintenance. If you don't have maintenance SOPs, you don't have cleaning SOPs, your SOPs are sitting on a shelf somewhere, then you're lacking the proper protocols to proactively mitigate these risks and ensure a consistent quality standard on the other end of what it is you're producing. So I highly recommend having your SOPs up to date and make sure your compliance is on point. So if you're reinvesting in your facilities, you may also have to reinvest in your protocols and your SOPs, which means looking at how old are these. More often than not, we run into cultivation operations, manufacturing operations, dispensary operations that have been sitting on the same SOPs for the last 5 years. They haven't been updated once. They haven't been adjusted to the new rules. They may be telling employees things to do that are no longer what the employee's doing. And guys, this is a huge product liability risk. Your SOPs are your first line of defense. if, and this has happened in Canada, $2 million recall, where people were getting sick from the product. And so if people start getting sick from your product, there are adverse events reporting in some states that require you to report the event or have it reported to you. But it really is grounds for things like class action lawsuits. You're seeing, in the news right now, McDonald's, recall on E. coli for their burgers. You got to know that somewhere along the way, somebody's going to be suing over that, just because they can, and because there is damage probably involved with somebody missing work or a class action lawsuit, or any of those other issues. So your product starts getting people sick. The first thing that the product liability lawsuit is going to look at are your production records, your harvest logs, so your seed to sale tracking, and your production batch tracking records, your quality management system, as well as your SOPs, which sort of inform how you do all of that. So if your SOPs are out of date and not accurate to what your employees are doing and how they do it, you already are at liability for potential product liability issues down the road. And that's going to come back to bite you in the butt because you don't have people trained on the newest set of SOPs, or they're doing things out of conformance and you're aware of that and you haven't checked to see if they should be doing it in conformance. We highly recommend not just SOPs as the guiding document, but day-to-day task management with your employees. Systems like Arroya can do that, where these tasks are issued to employees' phones. They know every day how much to water the plants. Notes are made if there are quick adjustments that need to be done. But the point is, they fill out forms, logs, reports, and have immediate accountability on their devices, which then go back to management and keep a daily electronic log right alongside your temperature, humidity controls, and everything else you're doing. So it's a really good way to be efficient, effective in what it is that you're trying to accomplish, by taking those SOPs, not having them sit on a shelf, and in fact translating them to usable day-to-day compliance management. So I think it's just important to kind of summarize how it is that we risk mitigate as best we can. I think in the industry, it's a challenge when it comes to laboratory noncompliance because it is an entity you do depend on. It's someone you have to work with. You have to trust them to a certain degree that they're doing the right things for the right reasons, the right way. And it makes sense to have to put that trust in them as the ultimate arbiters of the safety and potency of your products in the long run and to meet compliance. Without their approval, you can't sell your products. But it is different to receive their approval on merit and on integrity than it is to have sort of a side deal to get approval and then have them look the other way. And I think that's really the fundamental issue here is what companies do we want to keep in the industry and which ones are inevitably, through those types of practices, maybe barely going to survive or inevitably shoot themselves in the foot. And I think that's what we're really seeing, not just with the companies themselves doing that behavior, but also with the labs engaging in that behavior. We're firm believers that integrity speaks volumes. And at the end of the day, that is what's going to create an established brand that is a legacy business, and no one can really get anything on you. You're not dodging the scrutinies of the labs, of the regulators, because you're doing the right thing and you have the documentation you need to back up the fact that you're doing the right thing. And it's really building out that operational compliance infrastructure that builds in all of this compliance, including laboratory testing, including sampling, including verifying results and quality assurance programs, and ensuring daily systemized documentation by your employees that builds up more paperwork than the regulators can have on you. So in the event that a recall happens, hopefully it's not as painful. In the event that a laboratory fails on their end, you can show where that liability stopped and where you did all the right things as an operator. So through a combination of these factors, it's really possible to navigate the ninth circle of hell when it comes to laboratory testing. Nobody said it was going to be easy. Nobody said it wasn't going to be challenging or that it would be hot as hell in doing it. But it is possible. And we're here, of course, to help people navigate those processes and get through what they need to in order to create legacy businesses for the long term. So if you're ready to take your compliance to the next level and look at investing in your company, your people, your processes, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. We'll include our information here at the link below. Otherwise, if anyone has any questions, I'm open to those. And we thank you for joining us today on our webinar in navigating laboratory testing challenges in the cannabis industry.